My wife cheated while I worked 2 jobs to pay off her debts, so I took control of our finances and left her broke. I'm a 32-year-old guy who truly believed marriage meant unconditional loyalty. No matter how heavy the weight of responsibility became, when my wife confided that her credit card debt was spiraling out of control, something inside me switched into survival mode for us. I picked up a second job stocking shelves overnight while still maintaining my daytime office position. Convincing myself love meant absorbing every burden silently. Each evening, the smell of stale coffee clung to my clothes as I dragged myself home, bones aching, eyes burning, only to find her scrolling on her phone with distracted smiles. "I'm so lucky to have you," she'd whisper, brushing my cheek, and those words became fuel for my exhaustion. Inside, I felt both proud and terrified, like I was holding our entire future in shaking hands. I told myself real husbands didn't complain, that real men carried storms quietly. Whenever I hinted at stress, she'd sigh and murmur, "It's temporary, I promise. I'll fix everything soon," and I clung to that promise like a lifeline. Bills stacked on the kitchen counter, their red stamps screaming urgency, but I ignored the panic rising in my chest. I began skipping lunches, selling personal belongings, even delaying my own medical appointments just to keep us afloat. Our apartment felt colder lately, the silence heavier yet. I blamed work and fatigue instead of questioning her sudden emotional distance. When she flinched at my touch or retreated behind locked bathroom doors, I told myself she was overwhelmed, not hiding anything. "We're going to rebuild," I kept repeating, forcing hope into every breath I took. Yet a strange unease whispered that something wasn't as pure as I believed, lingering behind her distant eyes and unexplained late-night smiles. And the way she turned away whenever my questions grew louder. Started noticing the small changes the way you notice a crack in a wall, pretending it was always there and never growing. Every time I came home after 16 hours of work, the apartment smelled faintly of her new perfume instead of the familiar detergent we always used. She would be sitting on the couch, legs crossed, phone screen turned slightly away from me. "You're early," she said once, voice light but strangely tense. Inside me, a quiet alarm began to hum, but I forced it down with logic and love. I told myself she deserved space after all the stress I had put us through with my constant talk of budgets and bills. When I asked who she was texting, she laughed softly and replied, "Just a friend from work." Stop being paranoid. Her laughter didn't reach her eyes, and the warmth that once lived between us felt thinner every night. I missed the way she used to wait up for me, the way she used to ask how my day was and mean it. Now she barely looked up when I spoke, as if my voice had become background noise in our own home. One evening, I heard her whispering behind the bedroom door, her tone soft and almost playful in a way I hadn't heard in months. When I knocked and asked if everything was okay, there was a pause that stretched too long for comfort. "Yeah, I'm just talking to someone," she called out, and for the first time in our marriage, her voice sounded like a stranger hiding something important. And that uneasy feeling curled tighter in my chest as I stood there listening to the faint vibration of her phone through the door. I pressed my forehead against the cool wood and whispered, "Hey, talk to me." But she stayed silent except for a hushed laugh that didn't belong to us anymore. Something inside me tightened, and I wondered who was stealing her attention, while I slowly lost her without even realizing it. I'm still not sure what hurt more, the discovery itself, or the way my heart tried to protect her, even as the truth began peeling away. It happened on a quiet evening, when she left her phone on the kitchen counter while showering, water rushing behind the bathroom door, like white noise from my trembling thoughts. The screen lit up with a notification, a name I didn't recognize followed by a heart emoji, and my chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. I told myself I wasn't the kind of man who invaded his wife's privacy, but my fingers moved anyway, slow and shaking, as if they were being dragged by something darker than curiosity. Message after message unfolded, words dripping with flirtation, inside jokes, and plans that didn't include me. "I miss the way you look at me," the stranger had written, and her response pierced deeper than anything I'd read before. "It feels different with you." My vision blurred, and every sound in the room faded except the pounding of my own heartbeat. When she stepped out of the shower, steam curling around her body, I held up the phone and whispered, "Who is this?" Her face shifted instantly, from surprise to careful calm, like someone switching masks mid-performance. "It's nothing," she said, brushing water from her arms. "You're taking it the wrong way." I felt a strange mix of rage and desperation twisting inside me. "Then why does it look like you're building a whole other world with him?" My voice cracked, humiliating and raw, and she rolled her eyes like I was creating drama. "You're exhausted and overthinking," she replied, stepping past me as if my pain was an inconvenience. "He's just someone I talk to when I feel lonely." Lonely. The word echoed in my mind as I stared at her, feeling like years of sacrifice suddenly meant nothing. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to force her to feel the ache clawing through my chest. Instead, I swallowed every emotion and watched her walk away, her bare feet whispering against the tiles as though none of this mattered. I stood there alone, phone still glowing in my hand, unable to tell whether I was losing my wife or my sanity, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any argument we had ever shared. I told myself that one suspicious conversation didn't prove anything, that maybe I had overreacted, that maybe exhaustion was poisoning my mind. But the need to know gnawed at me like hunger, and over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to the woman I thought I knew, the way she dressed differently before errands, the way her mood lifted whenever her phone buzzed, the way she suddenly cared about her appearance when I knew she was supposedly just going to the grocery store one night. When she said she was meeting a friend for coffee, I watched her car pull away and felt something snap inside my chest. I followed at a distance, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned pale. The city lights blurred as my heart hammered, every red signal stretching my anxiety thinner. I told myself I would turn back, that this was insane, but my body refused to listen. She didn't stop at any cafe. She parked outside a small hotel tucked between two dimly lit buildings, and moments later, a man stepped out to greet her. He smiled at her in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in months, and she laughed softly, placing her hand on his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. That small gesture felt like a knife sliding slowly under my ribs. I sat there, frozen, watching as they walked inside together, his hand resting possessively on her lower back, and the world around me felt unreal. The faint hum of street traffic, the flicker of a broken street lamp, even my own breath felt distant. "This can't be real," I whispered, staring at the glowing hotel sign like it was mocking me inside. My mind screamed while my body felt strangely numb, like I had stepped outside of my own life. I realized then that my overtime shifts had funded these secret meetings, my sacrifices paying for their stolen moments, as I stared at the entrance. A dark awareness settled over me, heavy and suffocating. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being replaced, and I didn't know whether to confront her next time she came home, or let her keep lying while my heart quietly shattered in that empty parking lot. When she finally came home that night, the air around her smelled faintly of unfamiliar cologne layered over her perfume, and it made my stomach turn. I stood in the living room, with the lights off, waiting, heart punching against my ribs like it wanted to escape before she could hurt it again. "Where were you?" I asked quietly, my voice raw and brittle. She froze for half a second, then forced a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "I told you, I went out with friends." "Why do you look at me like that?" The pressure inside me snapped, and every ounce of pain I'd swallowed spilled into the open. "I saw you," I said, stepping closer. "The hotel, the man. Don't lie to me anymore." Her face drained of color, and for a moment, the mask cracked completely. The silence between us felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Then her eyes filled with tears, and she crumbled into a performance so convincingly fragile it almost broke me again. "I was lonely," she sobbed, clutching her chest. "You're never home, you're always tired," and I felt invisible. The words hit hard, twisting guilt into my already wounded heart. "So you cheated?" I whispered, barely able to breathe. She shook her head desperately. "It wasn't like that. I never meant to hurt you. It just happened." Inside, my world folded in on itself, torn between rage and the instinct to protect her. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, to drag every ugly detail into the light. Instead, I stood there shaking as she reached for my hands. "Please, we can fix this," she begged, her fingers cold and trembling against my skin. A part of me knew this was manipulation, that her tears were shields covering betrayal. But another part still remembered the woman I fell in love with. My heartbeat felt uneven, like it was racing and drowning at the same time. "I don't know how to trust you again," I murmured. She pressed her forehead to mine and whispered, "Then let me prove it to you." And as I stared into her red, desperate eyes, torn between dignity and denial, a quiet, unsettling thought crept through me. What if this apology was just another layer of her lies? I tried to live inside her apology, to let her words stitch together the fragile remains of my trust, but something inside me stayed unnervingly alert. She hovered around me now, overly sweet, overly careful, like someone afraid of waking a sleeping monster. "I'll fix everything," she kept saying, her voice trembling with forced devotion. "No more secrets, no more mistakes." But the unease refused to loosen its grip. One afternoon, while reviewing our bank statements, I noticed unfamiliar charges tucked between rent payments and grocery bills. My stomach tightened as I traced the numbers, patterns unfolding like a sinister map. There were purchases I didn't recognize, cash advances I never authorized, accounts I never opened. When I called the bank, my voice barely held steady as the rep calmly confirmed what my heart already feared. "Sir, these credit cards were approved in your name months ago." The air left my lungs. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I never applied for any of that." I confronted her that evening, spreading the statements across the kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. "What did you do?" I asked quietly, the calmness in my tone sharper than any scream. She stared at the papers, eyes glossy with fear, and then crumpled into the same desperate sobs. "I was scared you'd say no," she cried. "I thought I could handle it before you ever found out." "Handle it?" The words tasted bitter as poison. "You stole my identity," I said slowly. "You buried me in debt while you said you loved me." My reflection shimmered faintly in the stainless steel fridge, eyes hollow, jaw clenched, like I didn't recognize the man staring back. Inside, fury replaced sorrow, a cold clarity slicing through every illusion I'd clung to. I nodded slowly, forcing a calm that felt unnatural. "We're going to fix this the right way," I told her, my voice eerily controlled. She relaxed just a little, believing she'd been forgiven again. But as she turned away, my gaze lingered on the bills, the numbers, the proof of her calculated betrayal. And in that moment, something shifted quietly inside me, something she never saw forming. The realization that love had ended, and a far more dangerous resolve had just begun. The next few days felt surreal, like I was living beside a stranger who still wore my wife's face. I moved through the apartment with measured patience, my emotions sharpening into something colder, more disciplined. Her apologies followed me from room to room, a constant whisper against my resolve. "I swear I'll make it right," she said, her fingers brushing my sleeve. I nodded slowly and replied, "We'll sort this out together," even though my heart felt sealed shut inside. A different version of me was taking control, careful, observant, alert to every detail of her lies. I began documenting everything, every transaction, every late-night message, every suspicious withdrawal. The quiet hum of my laptop at 2 in the morning felt louder than my own thoughts. As I saved screenshots and organized statements into folders that whispered proof rather than, "Hope you're acting strange," she muttered one evening, standing in the doorway as I typed. Her voice sounded both worried and afraid. I forced a weary smile and said, "Just trying to understand what happened, so we don't make the same mistakes again." She relaxed, but her eyes searched my face for something I wouldn't give her. The air between us grew thick with tension, the kind that made every little sound feel amplified. The tick of the kitchen clock, the shuffle of her footsteps, the faint vibration of her phone on the nightstand, it all felt like background noise to a brewing storm. I studied her like a stranger wearing a familiar mask, noticing every sugar-coated word, every forced laugh, every careful glance in the mirror before leaving the house. She whispered one night, curling beside me like nothing had been broken. I stared at the ceiling and murmured, "I'm trying," while inside, a darker awareness strengthened. Love was no longer the foundation of my choice. Control was my mind drifted through strategies I never imagined I'd need to think about. Conversations with lawyers, silent calculations, contingency plans she knew nothing about. And as I watched her fall asleep beside me, breath soft and steady, I realized the real danger wasn't her betrayal anymore. It was what I was becoming in response to it, and how far I might be willing to go once the final truth surfaced. I didn't think it could hurt more than what I'd already endured, But that night proved me wrong in ways I wasn't prepared to process. She insisted we attend a small gathering with her friends, claiming it would help us feel normal again. The living room buzzed with chatter and cheap laughter, the air thick with perfume and clinking glasses, yet I felt painfully out of place, like a shadow drifting through someone else's life. When the conversation shifted toward relationships and money, her tone sharpened with a cruel edge I hadn't heard before. "Must be nice having a husband who lives to work," she said, laughing lightly, her eyes glancing at me like I was a punchline. "He's so obsessed with saving us that he forgot how to actually make me feel alive." The room filled with awkward chuckles, but my chest tightened as if someone had crushed my ribs inward. I tried to swallow the humiliation, but the words kept spilling from her, each one stripping away what little dignity I had left. "Honestly, sometimes it feels like I'm married to a bank account." "Not a man," she added, flashing a smug smile that felt sharper than any insult. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the low hum of conversation blurred into a suffocating noise I could barely stand. I muttered something about fresh air and stumbled outside, the cool night air hitting my face like ice water. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I leaned against the brick wall, breaths coming in shallow, broken pulls. I felt stupid, betrayed, and painfully small, like my entire existence had been reduced to a joke she could throw around for entertainment. Inside my mind, years of sacrifice replayed like a cruel montage. Every overtime shift, every skipped meal, every silent promise stacking on top of my collapsing pride. I slid down until my back hit the ground, staring at the dimly lit stars, wondering how I had allowed my life to become this hollow, and as the muffled laughter drifted from inside, I realized this wasn't just heartbreak anymore. Something inside me had shattered so deeply that I no longer recognized who I was, and the thought of going back inside to face her again felt terrifying in a way I couldn't ignore. The morning after that humiliating night, I woke up with an unfamiliar stillness inside my chest. Not peace, but something colder and sharper. Sunlight crept through the curtains, tracing pale lines across the bedroom floor as she slept beside me, blissfully unaware of the line she had finally crossed. I watched her for a long moment, listening to the slow rhythm of her breathing, and realized I felt nothing but a strange, hollow clarity. While she showered, humming softly like everything was normal, I sat at the dining table with my laptop open, fingers moving with deliberate precision. I logged into our joint accounts, the numbers staring back at me like silent witnesses to everything she'd taken. "You're just checking things again," she called from the hallway, her voice syrupy and unconcerned. "Yeah," I replied, keeping my tone neutral, "just making sure we're okay." Inside, every click felt like reclaiming a piece of myself she had stolen. I began transferring what remained of my paycheck into a separate account she couldn't touch, redirecting deposits, changing passwords, tightening digital locks she didn't yet realize were closing. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with a tense awareness that I was finally stepping back into control. When she noticed her card declining at the store, her voice trembled on the phone. "Something's wrong. My payment didn't go through," she said, irritation creeping into her tone. I paused, letting the silence stretch just enough to unsettle her. "That's strange," I murmured. "We might need to review our finances more carefully." When she came home, her eyes searched mine for answers I no longer felt obligated to give. "Did you change something?" she asked, suspicion masking the first flicker of panic. I shrugged slowly. "I'm just making sure we're protected," I said calmly, watching confusion ripple across her face. For the first time in months, it wasn't me scrambling for reassurance, it was her. And as she stared at the banking screen in disbelief, I saw the fear slowly rising behind her forced composure. A fear that told me she was beginning to sense something slipping away. And she had no idea just how much control I was preparing to take next. I didn't plan to expose her the way it unfolded. But the moment arrived like a storm breaking through a sealed dam. We were at her sister's birthday dinner, a long table crowded with familiar faces, clinking glasses, and forced smiles that suddenly felt unbearable against the truth burning inside me. The smell of grilled meat and sweet wine made my stomach twist as her friends laughed around us, completely unaware of the theater she had built for my suffering. She leaned closer and whispered, "You're quiet tonight." her voice dripping with pretend affection, and something in me snapped open instead of closed. I stood, palms pressed to the table, and said, "You want honesty? Let's have it right now." The room fell silent, forks pausing midair, conversations dissolving into uneasy glances. "What are you doing?" she hissed, eyes wide, but I pulled out my phone, hands steady, heart racing. "You've been cheating on me for months," I said, voice trembling yet clear. "And you opened credit cards in my name to fund it." Gasps rippled across the table like thrown stones. Her mother whispered, "Is this true?" while her sister's face drained pale. She laughed nervously, shaking her head. "He's confused. He's been stressed." She tried reaching for my arm, but I stepped away. "Here," I said, turning the screen toward them. Messages and statements glowing like undeniable scars. "Read it yourselves." The air thickened with shock as people scrolled through proof I never wanted to collect. One of her friends muttered, "I had no idea," while another stared at her like a stranger. My wife's phone suddenly lit up, and she glanced down, her expression tightening. "It's him," she whispered under her breath. And I knew exactly who she meant. I watched as she typed frantically, fingers shaking, and then went eerily still. "He blocked me," she murmured, panic seeping through her forced composure. In that moment, I watched her mask crumble, disbelief washing over her face. Every eye turned heavy with judgment. But what froze her smile was knowing I still hadn't revealed the darkest truth. I'm not sure when my heart stopped aching and started hardening, but I felt it the day I sat across from the lawyer. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, papers spread like the ruins of our marriage. "Is this what you really want?" she murmured when I told her I was filing for divorce, her voice trembling with confusion and barely restrained fear. I stared at her, the face that once meant home, and felt only exhaustion layered over quiet resolve. Inside, a slow storm churned, waves of grief colliding with an unfamiliar sense of justice. The lawyer explained how the debts linked to her identity fraud would fall on her, how the accounts would be separated, how the illusion of our shared life was legally disintegrating. Her breath hitched as she whispered, "You can't leave me like this." And I tasted the bitterness of every night she left me, emotionally stranded. I remembered the hotel parking lot, the laughter, the humiliation, and my spine straightened as if bracing against a final impact. The office smelled of paper and stale air, a sharp contrast to the memories we once built in softer spaces. When the documents slid toward me, my hands felt steady for the first time in months. "Sign here," the lawyer said, and the pen felt heavier than it should as I pressed my name into the final line. She watched in disbelief, eyes glossed over, lips parted as though she was still searching for words that could undo everything. "I thought you'd forgive me again," she whispered, and the desperation in her tone cut too close to the bone. My chest tightened, but I forced my voice to remain calm. "You already took everything you could." Outside, the sky hung low and gray, mirroring the weight still settling over my conscience. She followed me down the hallway, footsteps echoing off the tiled floor. "Please, don't do this," she begged, grabbing my sleeve with shaking hands. I gently pulled away, the fabric sliding from her grasp like the last thread of what we used to be. And as the elevator doors began to close, her reflection frozen in silent disbelief, a thought whispered through my mind. Had I truly freed myself? Or was the real fallout beginning? "You said the apartment felt impossibly quiet after she moved out, like the walls themselves were trying to process everything we had shattered." I walked room to room, listening to the echo of my own footsteps, the faint creak of floorboards, where her voice used to fill the air with excuses and promises. The scent of her perfume still lingered faintly in the bedroom, and for a moment, a swell of memory rose in my chest, warm and painful at the same time. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the weight of everything settle, not as a victim anymore, but as someone finally breathing without being crushed. "You're really okay with this?" My brother asked later that night over the phone, his voice cautious, protective. I stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me and whispered, "I don't know if I'm okay, but I'm no longer drowning." The words felt strange, like admitting a truth I'd buried under sacrifice for years. Outside the window, city lights flickered like distant stars, steady and indifferent to my healing. In the days that followed, her desperate messages faded from pleading to silence, and with each unopened notification, a small part of my soul felt lighter. I started waking up without dread, sitting heavily on my chest, without calculating how many hours of my life I'd have to trade just to survive another month of her chaos. The coffee I brewed tasted sharper, cleaner, as if even simple things were rediscovering their purpose beside me sometimes. I caught myself almost reaching for the old version of us. The one that existed before betrayal rewrote everything. But instead of collapsing into nostalgia, I let the grief pass through me like a slow tide, reminding myself that love built on deception was never love at all. Standing in the quiet of my home, I pressed my palm against my heartbeat and felt it steady, resolved, alive. Maybe freedom doesn't always roar. Maybe sometimes it whispers back your name when the noise finally stops. And as I closed my eyes, a gentle unease followed the calm, not fear of her return, but a quiet question of who I would become now that I finally belonged to myself again.